You put on a sort of brave-faced stoicism through treatment. Treatment's done.
Just moments ago, the silence was broken when Kate's medical team confirmed what had long been feared and quietly discussed behind closed doors. After days of carefully measured statements, the truth emerged with calm but devastating clarity, marking a turning point that changes everything for the family and leaves the nation holding its breath. The waiting ended not with urgency or raised voices, but with a deliberately chosen sentence spoken in a private consultation room, insulated from the outside world. The doctors neither rushed nor softened their words, delivering the information precisely and without illusion. For Prince William, the moment felt both sudden and inevitable after months of living between updates, learning to listen not just to what was said, but to what was left unsaid. This time, nothing was missing. The confirmation was brief, not a dramatic crisis, but a reality that could no longer be delayed, reframed, or set aside as temporary. What had once existed only in the margins of possibility was now clearly defined, and William understood immediately that this was not about something ending, but about something becoming permanent. Catherine absorbed the confirmation with a calm shaped by long preparation, having already endured months of uncertainty, examinations, and the quiet discipline of appearing unchanged while everything beneath the surface adjusted. Outside the room, palace life continued uninterrupted, unaware that a private reckoning had shifted everything within. The doctors spoke with deliberate precision, offering no reassurance or timelines, only a clear definition of reality. Catherine's condition could no longer be treated as temporary and would require ongoing, active management. Stability, they explained, did not mean recovery, but predictability within limits, vigilance as a permanent feature of daily life, and careful calibration rather than endurance. Strength could no longer be measured by pushing through discomfort, as misjudged limits would accumulate over time. This was not a conversation about overcoming something, but about living alongside it. Catherine listened intently, asking not how long it would last, but how to balance determination with depletion, visibility with stability, and duty with restraint. The doctors emphasized that rest was not a concession, but a requirement, that progress would not be linear, and that the real challenge lay not in the confirmation itself, but in carrying this knowledge forward into a life that would remain public, structured by duty, and expected outwardly to look unchanged. They explained that every demand placed on the body carried weight, whether acknowledged or not, and that unpredictability would remain good days arriving without warning and difficult. Days impossible to anticipate, making the goal not forced consistency, but the protection of equilibrium. When the conversation finally slowed, it ended without drama, leaving behind not despair but clarity, heavier than uncertainty, yet more focused, a reality that could be planned around even if it could not be changed. Catherine acknowledged it with a small nod of recognition, while outside the consultation room the palace continued unchanged, unaware that a quiet line had been drawn between before and after. William understood with sharp clarity that the confirmation demanded not retreat, but responsibility, a responsibility that settled quietly and shaped everything that followed. In the days afterward, life unfolded with unsettling normality. Engagements continued, meetings proceeded, and William's public composure never wavered. Privately, however, he entered a vigil of watchfulness, carefully monitoring balance rather than anticipating collapse. Each day became an exercise in calculation, every decision weighed for its cumulative effect. He noticed Catherine's energy, with precise attentiveness, the ease of some days, the resolve that carried her through others, and the subtle pauses no one else would register. He did not confront her or announce changes. Instead, he adjusted quietly around her, softening schedules and creating space without discussion, allowing vigilance to become an unspoken structure beneath the appearance of continuity that he learned to intervene invisibly, shaping circumstances so that refusal became unnecessary, a skill honed through years of public life and now repurposed for something deeply personal. What unsettled him was not the difficulty of the adjustments, but the realization that vigilance itself was permanent. At night, when the household slept and the day's performances were complete, William allowed his thoughts to move beyond daylight restraint, not toward fear, but toward sustainability, how long the pace could be maintained, which compromises were harmless, which would quietly accumulate, and where preservation ended and denial began. He thought often of their children, understanding that they absorbed atmosphere more than explanation, and resolved without hesitation that any recalibration ahead would be borne by adults, institutions, and systems built to carry weight, never passed down to those too young to name it. He reflected on legacy not as an abstract royal concept, but practically, considering what it meant to inherit an institution rooted in continuity and the quiet sacrifice it demanded in return. There were moments of frustration, brief and contained, born of uncertainty and the impossibility of planning with full confidence. Yet never panic, because William understood that frustration only mattered if it sharpened judgment, and panic belonged to chaos, not to a reality that required steady, deliberate care. This was not chaos or something uncontrolled. It was defined heavy, but bounded, and it demanded discipline rather than fear. Still, the vigilance carried a cost, and William found himself scanning days instead of inhabiting them, measuring success not by accomplishment, but by equilibrium, by whether a day ended without extracting something unseen. He began to judge moments not by how they appeared, but by what they consumed, and in quieter moments he recognized a truth more unsettling than any diagnosis. The future he had once assumed no longer existed in the same form. It was not erased, but rewritten, its certainty replaced by something conditional that required constant attention. Yet within that recognition came resolve. William did not see this as loss, but as responsibility sharpened by clarity, weighted by love, and complicated by duty. His role, he understood, was not to control outcomes, but to protect balance between visibility and preservation, duty and endurance, strength and restraint. The vigil was not about waiting for decline, but about guarding stability. Each morning began with quiet determination. Each evening ended with an assessment of what had been spent and what remained. He learned to accept unchanged days without assuming permanence, and difficult days without treating them as omens. This was a different kind of endurance, constant, unseen, and unannounced. Within the household, the shift arrived without explanation, spreading instead through pattern and adjustment. Senior aides noticed it first as routines subtly tightened, schedules softened, and margins appeared where none had existed before, signaling that something fundamental had changed without ever being spoken aloud. What appeared on the surface as minor logistical refinements carried deeper meaning. Endurance was now being deliberately protected. No one asked why, because within the household unnecessary questions had long since been unlearned. Language adjusted next, with internal briefings becoming leaner and more precise as words that implied reversibility quietly disappeared, replaced by neutral terms centered on balance and pacing. There was no panic in this shift, only discipline, as the palace did what it had always done when private gravity threatened public continuity: it closed ranks. Medical realities were absorbed seamlessly into planning without ever being named, and rest was safeguarded not as kindness, but as necessity. Decisions increasingly favored sustainability over visibility, while maintaining consistency, knowing that gradual recalibration invited acceptance far more effectively than sudden absence. Prince William led this phase quietly, approving changes without comment, ensuring nothing felt rushed or reactive, maintaining control through coherence rather than rigidity. Catherine remained fully involved by choice, not sidelined or shielded, and her authority within the household only sharpened, with her preferences treated as directives rather than suggestions. This was not retreat but refinement, and staff adapted quickly, learning which engagements mattered personally to her, where flexibility was essential, and where firmness served protection. Though unease surfaced at times, not fear, but the recognition of a long-term shift, those with experience understood what was unfolding even without it ever being named. Those within the household understood that this was not a temporary adjustment, but a structural change, and once structure shifts, it rarely returns to its original form. There was no dissent, because the monarchy does not function on consensus, but on alignment, and alignment was clear. Meetings grew quieter and decisions quicker, stripped of theatrical debate, and focused on a shared objective. Maintain continuity without strain, and preserve dignity without denial. Notably, there were no leaks or whispered narratives, as the palace held its silence with unusual discipline, knowing that restraint, when collective, carries power. William sensed this shift in the efficiency with which everything moved, as the institution absorbed pressure exactly as designed, redistributing weight away from the center through deliberate contingency planning framed not as emergency, but as preparedness. Catherine was aware of these plans without being burdened by them, her role clearly distinguished from managing institutional anxiety. Over days and weeks, a new rhythm emerged, calmer, more deliberate, less crowded, subtle to outsiders, but unmistakable within, as the household quietly recalibrated its center of gravity. Public statements would eventually be crafted with careful precision, speaking of balance, managed health, and continued service, every word defensible and accurate, yet none able to convey the private cost of that accuracy or the negotiations that preceded each appearance. What the public would see was continuity. Catherine composed and present, William steady at her side, smiles and warmth calibrated to the moment. What they would never see were the careful calculations beneath the surface discussions about timing, energy, and how much could be given without borrowing too heavily from what would be needed later. These discussions weighed whether the value of being seen outweighed the cost of being depleted, and they were never abstract, but precise, practical, and sometimes uncomfortable. Catherine grew increasingly honest about what she could give and, just as importantly, what she could not, learning restraint after years of being trained to extend herself, meet expectations, and smooth discomfort with composure. The public would never hear her private frustration when a good day ended too soon, or the quiet disappointment when plans had to be reshaped not by crisis, but by limits reached, nor her firm insistence that appearing strong could not come at the expense of remaining stable. William heard it all and carried it, just as the public would never see him alone late at night revisiting decisions not to second-guess them, but to measure their cost, calculating how many accommodations had been made and how many more might be required. He did not call this worry, but responsibility, the act of absorbing uncertainty, so others did not have to, and accepting that no public narrative could ever fully reflect private reality. At times, the distance between reassurance and vigilance felt immense, even surreal, yet William understood that whether the public grasped this effort was beside the point. The monarchy did not exist to be understood, it existed to endure. And endurance, unseen by the public, was not dramatic or tragic, but constant waking each day with a plan prepared to be abandoned, measuring success by equilibrium rather than visibility, accepting invisible victories and unnamed losses, and sharing quiet conversations rooted not in conflict, but in mutual restraint, where love meant protecting one another from unnecessary depletion. Fear lingered beneath everything. Fear that every absence would be interpreted, every adjustment dissected, and that the story might outrun the truth, shaping the household's careful movements, sustained silence, and gradual, almost imperceptible recalibration. The public would never hear the relief when a difficult day passed without consequence, nor the quiet disappointment when a promising one ended early, nor the exhaustion that came not from doing too much, but from endlessly deciding what was enough. Yet there was no self-pity in this, only resolve to move forward without illusion, to protect what mattered without surrendering everything else, and to accept that some truths must remain private not out of secrecy, but necessity. Reassurance would be offered publicly. Behind it existed reality, not collapse or tragedy, but endurance practiced daily without applause. William understood now that leadership in this moment was not about attention or spectacle, but about sustainability and the careful management of absence. The hardest part was no longer uncertainty, but clarity, because clarity demanded choice, and choice required sacrifices that, repeated quietly over time, reshaped lives without announcement. In the weeks after confirmation, understanding settled in gradually, built from accumulated days and small decisions that quietly reorganized the future. Life did not slow, it recalibrated. Engagements continued with clearer boundaries, invitations were weighed rather than assumed, and what could be done was no longer automatically done. This was stewardship, not withdrawal. For Catherine, restraint became a choice rather than an imposition, shifting her focus from visibility to impact, refining rather than diminishing her sense of duty. The household adapted, adjustments becoming rhythm, accommodation becoming structure, while outwardly the monarchy appeared unchanged. Inside, it had learned a new way to carry weight. William felt the difference most in the evenings, when vigilance softened into something sustainable, still careful, but no longer consuming. Difficult days remained, but they were treated as information rather than failure, allowing both William and Catherine to move forward without pretending the past still applied, guided instead by equilibrium. Not the absence of strain, but the deliberate management of IT. That IT was no longer framed as a return to something lost, but as something being built deliberately, patiently, and with clear eyes. Conversations between William and Catherine now centered on pacing not with drama or anxiety, but as a shared understanding. Some tasks would take longer, others would be done differently, and some would be let go entirely, without regret. What surprised William most was how little explanation this required. The confirmation had stripped away ambiguity and clarified priorities that might otherwise have remained unspoken. Family came first, not as a slogan, but as an operational reality. Health was no longer fitted around duty, was reshaped around health. This inversion did not weaken the institution, it strengthened it. William understood that the crown was preserved not through relentless presence, but through continuity that could be sustained. Over the weeks, the public narrative settled. Appearances recalibrated, expectations adjusted, and gradual change became normalized without alarm. Behind the scenes, planning continued with foresight rather than urgency, contingencies prepared without dramatization, and flexibility introduced into systems once defined by rigidity. William discovered that the fear he had once carried had not vanished, but transformed into a steadier awareness of responsibility, consciously carried rather than instinctively felt. The confirmation he had feared had not closed doors, it had clarified which doors mattered. The future would not be defined by what could no longer be assumed, but by what could still be chosen thoughtfully, deliberately, and without illusion. Catherine spoke not of limitation, but of balance, a lesson that reshaped everything. The confirmation from that single minute ago had not ended a chapter, it had ended uncertainty. What followed was not retreat, tragedy, or quiet decline, but something far less dramatic and far more demanding. A life lived with intention, a role carried with discipline, a future shaped not by fear, but by clarity. And clarity, once accepted, does not announce itself. It settles and quietly it endures. This is the reality of royal life, not defined by spectacle, but by endurance carried behind closed doors.